I am Seth Wallach. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Water Authority. So the way this program works is we'll be presenting. It'll be myself, Mike O'Connell, and Marisol Mallon from our laboratory. And we'll be taking all questions at the conclusion of the presentation. It just helps keep us on time. And so I actually want to tell you a little bit about why we do this program. We know there's a lot of information out there in the news about drinking water and drinking water quality, especially, and it can be confusing. So we want to make sure people have the accurate information they need. So that's why we created this program a few years ago, and we hold it in communities all across the county from Melville to Montauk. Today, you're going to hear from our experts on staff about things like your water quality. And we're going to talk about your local infrastructure as well and projects that SCWA is undertaking to improve that. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a program we call WaterTalk that actually lets you monitor the quality of the raw water from home. But most importantly, as I said, we're here to take your questions. So if you do have a question, just go ahead and hit that raise hand feature in the Zoom at the bottom of your screen. And at the appropriate time, we'll give you permission to speak. Or you can always put your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that throughout the program so I can read your question aloud as well. So first off, a little bit about us, what SCWA is. We're actually a non-for-profit independent public benefit corporation, and we serve 1.2 million people in Suffolk County. We were founded, or I should say we began our operations in 1951, and we're actually one of the largest groundwater suppliers in the country. So who aren't we? Well, we're actually not a branch of Suffolk County government, despite the name. A lot of people don't know that. And we do not create or enforce drinking water standards. This is the responsibility of the EPA and the New York State Department of Health. It's our responsibility to follow those standards, but we don't create or enforce them. And that's all I've got. So I'll be back later to talk about some other topics. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation over to Marisol Mallon. Marisol is a supervising chemist in our laboratory.
Thank you, Seth. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marisol Mallon. I have been with the Water Authority for almost 23 years. I actually started as a temp, and I worked my way to supervising chemist of the inorganic laboratory. So I would like to talk about our laboratory. So we're one of the largest groundwater laboratories in the country with state-of-the-art testing equipment. Our test samples are taken at the wellhead at various stages of treatment and within the distribution system for bacteria and a wide range of organic and inorganic chemicals. Last year, we analyzed 95,328 samples for a total of 203,136 tests. We test for 414 compounds, which is 265 more than required by our regulators. We test at a higher frequency than required by the Suffolk County Department of Health. So sometimes they might require that we test our samples biannually, but we test them monthly just to be safe. Our in-house standards for water quality are tougher than the federal or state regulations. So we are proactive in staying ahead of the curve. Our state-of-the-art laboratory can detect compounds in the water down to parts per trillion, parts per million, and parts per billion. So let me explain the levels of the detection, which are important to understand when we're speaking of contaminants and emerging contaminants. For example, 1 part per trillion is equivalent to a drop of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, just for reference, or 1 second in 32,000 years. Our instrumentation is so sophisticated and complex that we have no such thing as zero. We continue to test down to where we just see trace amounts. Our water is tested rigorously here at the Suffolk County Water Authority. Here we have a field technician collecting a water sample. She's using an aseptic technique to ensure that the sample is collected properly. We have over 300 of these sample stations located all throughout Suffolk County. in residential and industrial areas. Here we can test the distribution water right before it enters the customers' homes and businesses. The Suffolk County Water Authority lab collects and tests 940 samples a month for bacteria from these locations alone. Our bacteriology department runs a total of 2,000 to 4,000 samples a month from our source water, wells, and distribution system. So if you see one of these green boxes in your neighborhood, now you know what it is. Here is an example of our Consumer Confidence Report, or the CCR. If you're interested in the water quality in your area, you can go online at scwa.com. Here you can read about the Suffolk County Water Authority's current events, the treatment techniques, and view water quality data that our laboratory staff works hard to produce every year. The CCR also has an interactive map where you can find your house and the water quality for your house will pop up. So the concern in this area that we're talking about today is iron and manganese. We do have iron removal systems in place that do remove the iron and manganese. There are no health concerns associated with iron or manganese, but it is not aesthetically pleasing. So we do have systems in place. This is one of our systems. This is an iron removal system. This is what it looks like. We have 29 of these throughout Suffolk County, and we have 4 systems in this area alone. And now I'm going to take it off to Mike O'Connell.
Thank you, Marisol. So my name is Michael O'Connell. I am the Director of Production Control. The laboratory is, it's nice. It's a very self-explanatory department in the Water Authority. Production Control is in charge of operating the well fields and drinking water treatment equipment and the various pumps to move water around, keeping water in the water storage tanks. So that is where my department comes into play here. I've been here at the Water Authority for just over 20 years, but I have been working in the drinking water industry for over 35 now. So what's a PowerPoint presentation in anyone's world? For those of us that have to view these from time to time without having a slide that has statistics. So the Suffolk County Water Authority, we operate 633 individual wells that are located at 240 different properties throughout Suffolk County. We have an inventory of 68 water storage tanks that we store almost 72 million gallons of water in them. That does not include, right now, we've just started construction on another 2 million gallon water storage tank out in the East Hampton. On an average daily basis over the course of a year, the Water Authority produces about 210 million gallons of water a day to the 1.2 million people that we serve. In the summertime, those numbers go up significantly to where we are producing between 470 million and 500 million gallons a day. And Seth will speak a little bit more to that a little bit later when we talk about water conservation. These wells are all connected to water distribution mains that run underneath the streets in front of your homes from street to street, all of them being interconnected. And there are hundreds of miles of water main, and we are probably around 37,000 fire hydrants throughout the entire service area. So here we see a slide showing Suffolk County in general. Every little blue dot that you see is a Water Authority well field, or maybe some of them may be just booster stations with pumps in them, or a water storage tank. But you can see that we go from your folks' neighborhood in Amityville all the way out to the tip of Montauk, and all the way out to the tip of the North Fork on the other side as well, and up and into Huntington, Fire Island. And we even now have one little dot on Shelter Island that we are managing a small water system on Shelter Island right now that we just started a couple of years ago. So that is our first foray into Shelter Island as well. So we really do cover the county from one end to the other. The red stars that you see are actual offices, be they either administrative or the laboratory, or, we have some type of maintenance crews working from, as you can see, Huntington, Bayshore, Hauppauge, Oakdale, West Hampton. We were kind of spread out with these various different offices from one to the end to the other to help reduce our response time to emergencies. So where's our source water come from that all of us consume here on Long Island? So all of Long Island, not just Suffolk County, but all of Long Island, and you may have heard it many times in the newspaper, is served by a sole source aquifer for drinking water purposes. So this means that any of the drinking water that we are all consuming is coming from underneath our feet. There geologically exist underneath Long Island, essentially 3 main aquifers. We have the first one here, closest to the surface, is what we call the upper glacial. The large one in the middle is the Magathy. And then below that, at the deepest points, is what is known as the Lloyd Aquifer. So for consuming purposes for us here at the Water Authority, the majority of our wells are in the upper glacial and in the Magathy. We only have a couple wells in the Lloyd Aquifer. It's obviously being that much deeper, it's that much more expensive to drill to the Lloyd. But right now there is also a moratorium from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to prevent anyone else from tapping into the Lloyd, because the Lloyd ends up being pretty much the sole source that many communities on the south and north shores of Nassau County, that's about the only water source that they have. Because of the geology, again, there's more saltwater contamination of the upper glacials and the Magathy aquifers in those parts of Nassau County, so they have to go to the Lloyd. So the state has put this moratorium on anybody else drilling into the Lloyd to help conserve that and prevent it from getting any further contamination. So as we could see, we have a cloud here. This is our general water cycle that we like to say. We have clouds, we have precipitation that falls to the ground. Anything that falls to the ground then seeps through the soil and into the water table. So as we show here, we have houses with septic tanks. Any of this rainwater is going past those. We have gas stations and underground fuel storage. We have industrial facilities that may have old ponds or something along those lines. We have agricultural uses. We play agricultural uses even in residential areas, in that, a lot of folks love a green lawn on Long Island and they're applying various pesticides and herbicides. So all of these things that are sitting upon the surface and have rainwater go past them, that water is going to potentially pick some of these things up, drag it down into the water table with it, and eventually it's all going to make it down to our first aquifer, being the upper glacial. And over another 80, 90, 100 years, that's going to continue to get dragged down even further until it starts showing up at our various wells. So that's what this is supposed to symbolize here. These are wells. This is one drilled into the upper glacial. This is one drilled into the Magathy, which is much deeper. So as you can note, the upper glacial is what one would expect would be the first one to pick up potential contaminants. Pretty much for the Water Authority, any new wells that we drill and replacement wells that we drill are all drilled into the Magathy aquifer in most cases, not all, because we may be trying to get around some old type of contamination. But typically for water traveling, and if there was a contaminant that was picked up here on the surface, in some areas you could see it showing up in the upper glacial in maybe 20, 30 years. Depending on how deep one is in the Magathy, it may take another 50, 60 years on top of that before we start to see that. In other cases, there could be some type of a spill right near, right next to a well or something like that, that maybe we might see it even sooner than that. So for the Amityville, North Amityville, Copiague area, this is basically what we've outlined in green. It's a pretty large geographical area, and what we're trying to show here is where our various water supply facilities are for you folks in your neighborhood. It's very difficult to see, so if you can see my mouse, I'm going to try and circle them because most of these properties are fairly small, but there's a well field here. This is the Southern State Parkway. This is Farmingdale above it, East Farmingdale above it. This would be Sunrise Highway, Montauk Highway. So actually this nice straight line is the railroad tracks. So we have a well field here in Amityville. This is Lambert Avenue in Copiague, Albany Avenue in North Amityville, Great Neck Road, North Amityville. And then you can see there's some over off here to the side as well. The other thing you're seeing with this is all these faint red, orange lines and thin blue lines. Those are all water mains. So, you know, everyone has a water main of a certain size going down their street that interconnects to another water main on another street, which connects to another, eventually ties into a well field and a water storage tank. It's all interconnected. All the water flows from one end. If I don't have any wells running here in Amityville, these wells over here in Copiague will supply water this way. Will supply water this way. Everything, it's all one large interconnected system with one facility backing up another. One of the other big issues for us in the water business these days, besides potential contamination and water treatment, is aging water infrastructure. I don't think I probably need to tell most people in Amityville and Copiague, especially if you live down near the water, that we get a lot of water main breaks. We have a lot of water main that has been in the ground for close to 100 years in some neighborhoods. The pipe that was constructed 100 years ago is not as good as the pipe necessarily that's constructed today. The material types, the South Shore, when we get south of Montauk Highway, much of that older water main has been laying in groundwater a good chunk of the time because your groundwater levels are so high down there. One of the technological improvements of installing water main that we do these days is where we know it's going to be sitting in groundwater like that is we'll either use a non-metallic pipe or sometimes we'll take the pipe and we wrap it in a plastic sheeting almost to give it some protection from the salt water that may be rising and falling with the tides. So this, water main has taken some abuse, and essentially this listed here are 4 or 5 different projects that have either been recently completed or we are planning on completing in the near future. In the case of Baylon Avenue up in Copiague, where we go in and we replace all the water main in the street, all new services, retire the old water main. And this is a ongoing effort that has happened and continues to happen and will for the next forever, really, because by the time you get, it's kind of like, as my father used to say, you get done painting your rooms in your house. By the time you get to every room in the house, you got to go back around to the kitchen and start all over again. We prioritize these replacements based upon our budgetary concerns. We try to hit the areas that have the most amount of breaks or in the worst condition first. And, there's not just priorities for Amityville and Copiague, but there's priorities for all of Suffolk County. So we always ask people to be patient as we complete these projects. They're very expensive, but it's all done to help improve your service in the long run.
Mike, before we move on, we had an aquifer related question. How many feet down is each layer?
Well, that's a good question. So the upper glacial can start, we have wells as shallow as 100 feet, 75 feet. Really, the upper glacial is really, that first layer is exactly where the water table starts. So in some areas on the South Shore where we have wells, the water table starts as little as less than 100 feet from the surface of the ground. The upper glacial on the South Shore anyways typically goes down to about 250 feet. And then there is what they call a confining layer of clay. That's the layer of brown that separates the two aquifers. Again, that the thickness of that can vary from 15, 20 feet to 100 feet. But typically then we start to hit the magathy at about 275 and can go as deep on the South Shore. The magathy can go as deep as 600 or 700 feet. If you wanted to get to the Lloyd on the South Shore, I want to say Long Beach, New York has got wells that are 750 to 800 feet deep to be able to get to the Lloyd.
Yep. And before we move off that slide, I just wanted to point out, if you see the direction that the blue arrow is moving, you'll notice that groundwater flows to the southeast. So when we talk about source water in terms of, things we do on the surface that can affect our groundwater ultimately, it's not always just the ground that's above a well. It could be, the ground that is, miles to the northeast, the northwest, I should say, of a well. It's not a direct relationship. As you go deeper, that source water is from even farther northwest in theory. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. And it almost works out with Long Island that, especially once you hit Suffolk County, that the spine of the island geologically kind of follows the Long Island Expressway. So anything south of the Long Island Expressway, the water tends to flow south and east towards the bay. And then if you go north of the expressway, water tends to then flow north and east towards Long Island Sound. So it's, and yes, they're the source for a particular well can be 10, 15 miles away from where the actual wellhead is itself.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to talk to you about WaterTrack. What WaterTrack is, it's a tool that's actually brought to you by the Long Island Commission for Aquifer Protection, or LICAP. So LICAP essentially is a bi-county commission made up of all sorts of stakeholders in Long Island's aquifer. So it's represented really by, it's the Suffolk County Water Authority. It's an organization that represents really every water supplier in Nassau County as well, with the Long Island Water Conference. And then it's our regulators as well. The DEC takes part in LICAP, so does the Department of Health, and so does the United States Geological Survey. So LICAP is really about bringing all the key stakeholders together when we study the aquifer. And they've released this tool known as WaterTrack. And what that does is it pulls data from our wells that's provided by the Water Authority and other water suppliers on Long Island. It pulls laboratory data. And what we've created is a searchable database. So this is an example. This is a screenshot of WaterTrack. You can search your address in the top left, or you can search by compound. In this case, we use the example of chlorides. We wanted to see chlorides in the water at anything above 250 milligrams per liter. And there's really only one hit for this. It's over here in the Farmingville area. So that's just an example of how to use WaterTrack. If you're interested, it's licaponline.com, and you'll see the link for WaterTrack right at the top of that site. But it's a great way to track your water quality from home, in addition to what Marisol referenced earlier, in addition to the Water Authority's Drinking Water Quality Report, which is also a good way of knowing what's in your water. And you could also search by address. So the last thing we want to cover tonight before we really open it up to your questions is water conservation. So as Mike pointed out when he had that map on the screen of the layers in our aquifer, we've got plenty of water underneath our feet. However, with that said, it's not a supply that is absolutely limitless. We need to be careful about how we use the resource to make sure it's around for future generations of Long Islanders. And also, when we need to provide more water in the heat of the summer especially, the more we're pumping our wells, the more our wells are turned on, that's the more we're paying for in electricity. The Water Authority is PSEG's best customer. So the more power we use, that means ultimately the more costs that are passed along to our customers. As a non-for-profit public utility, our costs really end up being your costs. So when we actually have to provide less water, it saves us money and can save you money in turn. I know it seems strange that the company who sells water is trying to convince you to use less water, but I promise you, this is actually the best solution for all of us. Peak water usage, as I said, typically in the summer, and it's between 3 and 7 a.m. that impacts our infrastructure the most. That may surprise people because you're thinking, who the heck is awake at 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, it's not everyone's shower that's really affecting our wells. It's really everyone's sprinkler systems. And everyone's sprinkler systems, or most people's sprinkler systems, kick on in those early morning hours. Additionally, when you over pump water out of the ground, especially in like a coastal community, they have this issue in Long Beach a little bit, Western Nassau especially. Anytime you over pump, there's a risk that you could let salt water in and have saltwater intrusion that could actually foul a well permanently, and we'd have to shut it down. This is a graph that we like to show everybody that kind of makes seasonal water use hit home. We call it the irrigation situation. So on the x-axis here, we've got time of day, 00 being midnight. And on the y-axis here, we've got gallons per minute pumped by Water Authority wells. Take a look at this dark blue line. This is our winter pumpage versus our summer pumpage up here, a little bit more on the weekend. But what I want to show you is this light blue line. This is a rainy day during the summer. So in theory, a rainy day should really match our winter pumpage, right? Because we don't need anybody irrigating their lawns. This light blue line is as high as it is so that people can water their lawns in the rain. A lot of irrigation systems are set it and forget it these days, and we know that's a convenience for people, but we're reminding you the most important thing you could do is really set your system either to not operate between 3 and 7 a.m., or even better yet, use an odd even schedule. Your lawn actually doesn't need to be watered every day. For Long Island's climate, every other day watering is perfectly sufficient. We promise your lawn won't die. And one smart thing you can do is actually invest in a smart irrigation timer for your irrigation system. This is a grow model. This is just one example of a smart irrigation system, but there's many brands. And the Water Authority has actually created a program to incentivize you to look into these smart irrigation systems. If you could show us a receipt that you purchased one of these systems, we give you $50 off your SCWA bill just for purchasing one. And this doesn't just go for irrigation systems. We'll give you $50 off your bill if you purchase any water saving device. So that also includes faucet aerators, low flow shower heads, and what are called smart valves that actually attach to your water service line, and you can control them from your phone, where you can actually open or close your service line to make sure you're not using any water at all when you're not home, even if you have small leaks in the house. So the average water user versus the water waster, our average residential user uses, I would say, just under 130,000 gallons a year, give or take. And we had one user that used 22 million gallons in 1 year, which is actually more than the local hospital. It was more than Southampton Hospital. Now, in this particular case, this was a large estate that was using an incredible amount of irrigation and also an underground geothermal heating and cooling system. Geothermal systems are great because they're a really green way to heat and cool your home. The problem with them is if you've got a system that uses an open loop, it's continuously using public water all day, every day, and it ends up being pretty wasteful as a resource in that sense. So here are sort of our top 10 water conservation tips. The smartest thing you can do is look into the smart irrigation controller. Like I said, look into rain sensors. Those are eligible for our $50 credit as well. And watering less often is the big one. Every other day, or depending on the climate, depending if it's summer or fall, even every third day. Take a look out for this label, the EPA WaterSense label. And even cutting down on your showers by a minute or two does add up over time. Number 5 is a big one, detect and fix leaks. You'd be surprised, just a 1 drip per minute leak on a sink can add up over time. an easy one to just shut off the tap as you're brushing your teeth. And making sure when you're running dishwashers and washing machines, making sure we're always running full loads. We're not being wasteful in that sense, using mulch to keep plants moist outside. And instead of, hosing down something like a dirty driveway, maybe use a broom and try not to waste too much water. And the same goes for washing your car in the driveway or in the street. Car washes tend to recycle water, and so that can actually be much more efficient than washing it with the hose. I talked already about one of our WaterWise programs, the WaterWise Accounts Credits. To apply for one of those credits, all you have to do is go to scwa.com/WaterWise. You'll see a form on that website that you can actually fill out and attach your receipt as a file. We take JPEGs, PDF, pretty much anything you got in terms of that proof of purchase. And then we also have our WaterWise Checkups program, which is another free service that the authority provides, during which one of our experts will actually come to the home for a one-on-one consultation, and we'll develop sort of a personalized plan to help you save water. We estimate how much water you're using at all the different points in your home, and we're able to make you a plan. If you're interested in this program, just send an email to waterwisecheckup@scwa.com. You can always call that dedicated phone line for the WaterWise Checkups, which is 292-6101. Or just send us a DM. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. And my last point about water conservation, I just wanted to let you know about the Our Water, Our Lives program. Essentially, this program was another initiative of LICAP. And as you can see, we've included, Suffolk County government, Nassau County government, environmentalists, Irrigation Association. It's an all-encompassing water conservation brand. And we encourage you to go to ourwaterourlives.com and take the pledge to conserve water. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. I'm monitoring the chat. I don't see any hands raised. So if you do have a question, make sure you use that raise hand button or type your question into the chat and I'll read it aloud. Not seeing any right now. We're going to stick around for a few minutes just in case anybody comes up with anything. And I guess we'll wrap up around 7 o'clock. How does that sound? I see we've got one hand raised. Marcus, you should be able to unmute now.
All right. Just a quick thing. I mean, I've had 3 breaks in my around my house. I live on the corner, 2 on the side street, 1 on the main street. And my only thing is with the county is when they come, they tear open your sprinkler systems, but they don't tell you. And then they have to send another crew out to fix them. To me, that's kind of like a waste of money.
Marcus, this is Michael. I guess these breaks then are close to the sidewalk or like right there in the median of a sidewalk. That's why we might be hitting an irrigation system.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's been 30 years, but having been one of the guys that's out there doing the work, if you're dealing with a break situation that's a little muddy and a little dirty, sometimes you don't realize that you've actually hit something like an irrigation line, which is rather shallow. They're usually only black plastic. So as they're going through and, they're near impossible to mark out in advance the way we have markouts done for gas mains and electric lines and telephone lines. So I guess I don't want to justify it, but I think that what the difficulty is many times they may not even realize that they've broken it. And that's what causes a return visit, because nobody really knows it's broken until the next time your sprinklers go on. And
Exactly.
you go, hey, I got a new sprinkler head where I never had a sprinkler head before. I would hope that if they did realize it at the time, that they would be completing a repair to patch it up and not just leaving it to have to come back again. But, not working directly with those folks and knowing these specific circumstances, that's about the best advice I could offer.
All right. Well, the woman I spoke to who was in charge of that, I got to say, handled it beautifully. They came out, they fixed everything. even asked me what type of grass seed I wanted. I mean, I'm very happy with the service I got, and I'm very happy with the water company. But that was just my question. All right, thank you.
Well, I would think that's probably maybe the reason why in these particular cases is they may not even have realized that they went through it. It's and again, we didn't realize it until, like you said, the next time your sprinklers came on. And you're right. If they did realize it and they knew it then, they should have repaired it then, so we didn't have to return again. So.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this time. Like I said, we'll stick around till 7 o'clock just in case. But if anyone has any questions, just go ahead and throw it in the chat or hit that raise hand button. Thank you for coming, everybody. We appreciate it. Marcus, did you have a second question, or is that the same hand from earlier?
No, I have a second question.
Go, rip it. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, I'm from Bethpage originally, and I live by Grumman, where they're having all the water plume problems and stuff like that. Are there any areas around here that are considered as bad as what it was with Grumman and Bethpage, or close to it?
Well, thankfully, no. You folks in North Amityville, Copiague, the discolored rusty water issues that we battle incessantly and hopefully have made a huge dent in the last 20 years. That is your primary issue of concern, and that iron and manganese is naturally occurring, and it's an issue for the entire South Shore of Long Island. Bethpage being a little bit more centrally located, and obviously with Grumman where it's at, the Grumman plume itself has still not made it outside the borders of Nassau County, thankfully. Hopefully now with the agreements they have with DEC for remediation, they will get treatment installed and start pumping it and hold it where it's at so it doesn't migrate any further. We do a lot of monitoring, to make sure that, we're not seeing anything coming at us. The first neighborhoods that would have to be dealing with this would be East Farmingdale before it got to North Amityville. But as Marisol had gone through, we do a lot of samples. She threw out the numbers, and my people are collecting all the wellhead samples, so I know how many samples we're taking. We do a lot of samples to monitor these various contaminants, and even more than what is regulated, to ensure that we're not going to have to deal with any of these issues at all. So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, if you come up with anything, we'll be here for a few more minutes. If after we leave the call, you think of something, I really should have asked them that, no problem. Just shoot us an email. My email address is my first name, SETH, dot my last name, which is WALLACH at SCWA, is in Suffolk County Water Authority.com. I'll be happy to answer your question tomorrow. All right. It doesn't appear that we're going to get any more questions, so I think we can go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank you so much, Marisol, Mike. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Seth. Thanks, Mike.